guess I should have worn my yoga clothes with that kind of intro. Well, it's great to be with you again. I had a blast last time we were here. Can you believe it's already been, 12 weeks, 11 weeks, 12 weeks? I mean, that's amazing. How many folks, show of hand, how many folks lost weight? Fantastic. How many people met their goal? Excellent. How many people had family and friends who just got freaked out by the changes they made? Huh? Yeah, a couple of folks back there, absolutely. Well, tonight's going to be about tying it all together and maintenance. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to make you clean up after we're finished. That's not the maintenance we're talking about tonight. We're talking about perseverance. We're talking about continuing to do what you've done to make the changes that have occurred. And that's absolutely critical. That is absolutely key to your success. You look at statistics. 98.7% of people who lose weight on a diet, 98.7% regain that weight within 6 months. 40% gain more than they ever lost within 9 months. So maintenance is absolutely critical. You don't want to waste what you've accomplished. So what I want to do tonight is to really give you some practical information, because I'm big on practical, but I'm also big on understanding why you're doing the things you're doing, and I think that's critical to what we're going to talk about. And also, if you how many were here the first night when I talked? Good. So some of you will recognize the jokes. Just pretend that they're different. Hopefully, I'll use some tonight that are a little different. But the thing to remember about maintenance is that there's as many ways to do it right as there are people. There's no magic key. There's no magic guide to what is going to work for you as an individual, because each one of you is unique. And I think some of what you discovered during this journey these last few weeks is that what works for Aunt Sally might not work for you, and what works for your neighbor might not work for you. And hopefully part of this discovery has been what works for you, because everybody is unique. Each person, that's one thing I've learned in medicine, is you can't cookbook any of this because everybody is unique. And let me show you how you can believe that. Everybody get out their index finger and take a look at it. Look at the little swirls, the little patterns on there. You are the only person in the entire universe that has ever lived, that ever will live, that has exactly that same fingerprint. Think about that for a second. No one else ever will be the same. You are special. You are unique. When an artist paints a picture, one of the best moments for them is at the very end, when they've completed their masterpiece and they sign their name. They put their signature on the piece because they want the world to know about their creation. That's God's signature on the masterpiece that is each one of you. It's unique, it's special. He's proud of His creation. So anytime anybody makes you feel you're a little less than special, or maybe you're beat down and knocked down, or you're not unique, just give them the finger. This finger. This finger. I think somebody over there was all ahead of me already. We know where this side of the room's mind's going. You know, GYNs, gynecologists have to have a sense of humor. You know, you think about what we do all day and the kind of abuse we get. I can't even watch television anymore because of all the jokes about gynecologists on some of the medical shows. But we got to have a good sense of humor. I got to take a second and tell you a story that a few years back, my wife, who's with me tonight, we were at one of my classmates' funerals. This was about 5 or 6 years ago. It was a fellow that I went to medical school with 35 years ago, and he was a friend, but he was one of those kind of guys that just didn't have a lot of friends in the class. He was the kind of fellow who could just brighten up a room by leaving it. He was that kind of guy. And he was a cardiologist. He was a heart doctor, and that was his specialty. And he was very, very good. Not the best bedside manner in the world, but he was a good doctor. Well, we went to the funeral, and it was this beautiful downtown church, and immediately when we walked in, we kind of noticed that it was a little different because at the front of the church was his coffin. But behind the coffin was this big, huge heart. And so the service went on, and everything was pretty normal. And it came to the very last part of the service, and the preacher stepped back. The heart splits in the middle, and the casket rolls back behind it, and the heart closes. And I look over at my wife, and she's giggling. I'm saying, Susan, this is kind of somber. That, all the music was playing. I said, don't be laughing. And she says, I can't help it. I'm just thinking about what they would do at your funeral. Gynecologists got to have a sense of humor. This lady back there is going, what? Last time we got together, I started out by telling you one of the most critical things you can do for your success is determine why you want to lose weight. You have to know the why. And hopefully by this point, everyone has got that very much cemented in your head and your heart as to why. Hopefully you've also got the how. Hopefully over these past few weeks with your other speakers, with the stuff that's been going on at the Y, with things that you've done on your own, you've learned the how. Well, the next step is answering the question, what now? And that's an incredibly important question. That's a question that I wish people would ask more often. For example, when they're faced with bad things in their lives, tragedies, horrible things. I think about the thing over in Brussels today, and I think about that, and I wonder why. But I think the critical question for that and for you right now is, what now? We might not never know the why for something like that. Maybe we do. Maybe we don't understand it. But now the question is, what now? So tonight, the question I want to help you begin to formulate, and again, you have to formulate it yourself because it's going to be different for every single person in this room. But you've got to figure out the what now. Now, I'm going to give you some pointers that pretty much are universal regardless of what direction you go. But I'm going to give you some pointers that each one of you can use and tailor that to your individual needs and make it so that these past several weeks are absolutely beneficial to you for the long term. Because tonight is really the start in many ways. As you heard, I run marathons, and we break that down into segments or we'd go nuts. If you get at that start line and think, I've got to go 26.2 miles? A lot of folks would say, you're out of your mind. But if you say, well, I've just got to run 4 10Ks, that's palatable. That's something that may be doable. Some of you are still saying, you're out of your mind. But it's a little bit more doable. So you have to kind of look at this being, in some ways, not as I think it was Winston Churchill said, this is not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning. Think about that later and catch it. But it's really true. Tonight is a new start, because what you do from here determines where you're going to be 6 months, 9 months, a year from now. And that's the goal. Every weight management program worth its salt has 2 goals. One is to get you that goal weight, but 2 is to maintain that long term. You've got to get off that roller coaster. We've all been on that. Gain 10, lose 12. Gain 5, lose 6. Gain 8, lose 4. Studies show that people who are on the roller coaster actually have a higher risk of complications from heart disease, stroke, cancer than people who are 25 pounds overweight and stay that way. So that's further motivation for what you've achieved to make it permanent. We want you to get to a point where that's something that is a lifestyle and not just a diet. I mean, just get that word out of your mouth. I don't ever want you to even think about doing that again. Because what does that do? It implies that you're starting something, but more importantly, it implies that you're stopping something. You've got to begin to think about this as, this is my life now. This is where I'm living. This is where I'm going to be. And if you get that mindset, it begins to change. It's not like, I want to lose this weight and then I can go back to doing what I did before. It's not going to work. You're going to get exactly what you got before. So begin to think about this as a lifestyle. You don't want to be like Mark Twain, who said the only way to maintain your health is to eat things you don't like, drink things you can't stand, and do things that you don't really want to do. We got to get past that. We want this to become something that is a lifestyle, something that's meaningful. We're going to end tonight talking a little bit about, you saw in your syllabus there, a little bit about the Couch to 5K. And that's one tool for being able to make this a lifestyle. And we'll spend a few minutes of that at the end. But let's start about practical ways to kind of make this something that's going to be permanent for you. I read a study not long ago, Journal of American Medical Association, that was what we call a meta-analysis, and that's just a fancy word for meaning a really, really good study. That's where they take a bunch of scientific studies that are really good studies, and they pool all that data and that information, and they come up with even a better study because they've got a lot more people to draw the information for. The more people you have in these studies, the more valid your conclusions. And what this study was looking at was two factors. One, are there any particular weight management programs, and mainly they looked at kind of what you would call the commercially available programs, the things that you see advertised on television and that you can look outside and see their buildings all around. You know the ones I'm talking about. They looked mainly at those. And then the second question was, what were characteristics of people who maintained their loss? And what was fascinating was that in people who were successful on the dietary programs, there was no big difference between any of them. People who were motivated lost weight regardless of what program they participated in. But there was one factor. There was one factor in the people who maintained the weight loss that permeated regardless of the program. And it was so simple. And that one factor is they were motivated to stay involved. And you're sitting there going, duh. You didn't have to spend a couple of $1 million. You could have called me, take me out to Longhorn, and I'd have told you the same thing. But it's that motivation that was the key factor across the spectrum. Now that sounds rather simplistic, but when you break it down, it gets a little more complicated. And I want to break that down because it's so important, because each one of you, if you're going to maintain what you've achieved, are going to have to understand this concept, or you're setting yourself up for failure. So that's why I want to break it down. This is going to be kind of a mini psychology lesson tonight on motivation, because they identified 4 different types of motivation that people have with regards to weight loss. But then more importantly, they identified the 2 that were critical for being successful in maintaining that. And they very simply asked the question, I'm losing weight because fill in the blank. And what they found was there were basically 4 categories of answers. I'm losing weight because. The first is what we call external motivation. And those are people who are losing weight because they were told to. Your doctor told you need to lose weight. Your wife, your husband said you need to lose weight. Your kids said you need to lose weight. The postman said you need to lose weight. You know, you got information from the outside, and part of the motivation is based on reward or punishment. I'm losing weight because I'm going to win the $10,000 the family why promised me if I lost the most weight. That's what they're giving away, right? Isn't it 10,000? That's what I thought. But that's external motivation. There's a certain reward or a certain punishment associated, and it comes from outside yourself. Let me back up just a second and explain very quickly. When people talk about personality types, there's a spectrum. No one person, you know, you read the psychology text and you read these textbooks, you can't pigeonhole one person in any specific category because people are so complex. People have such a diversity of personality traits that you can't ever pigeonhole. But we can give generalities, and those generalities help us to understand how people behave. And essentially, there's a spectrum of personalities based on where a person gets their understanding of their sense of self, and it's divided into one end of the spectrum that's called an internal locus of control. And that's the person who is completely self-sufficient. They feel like that they control the world. Everything that happens to them is because of something Donald Trump is somebody with a lot of internal, you know, what is it the other night they asked him, and he said, well, I consult with myself because I have a brain. I mean, he's very much an internal locus of control person. He understands that the world doesn't happen to him, he happens to the world. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is what we call people who have an external locus of control. And that means they have no control of what happens to them. Everything that happens in their life is because of something else around them. You know, whether it's an event, or whether it's another person, or whether it's their dog is speaking to them, somebody is controlling them to a great degree. They don't feel like they have any ability to make a difference. Now again, those are opposite ends of the spectrum. But most of us fall somewhere in that middle area. Well, this first area of motivation for losing weight is more towards that external. You know, I'm losing this because my doctor said I'm going to croak if I don't. Or my wife said that she's going to go on a 6-year cruise or something if I don't. You know, that extra motivation from the outside. The second is what we call introjected motivation. And that's a little different because what it says is I'm losing weight because I'd feel bad about myself if I didn't lose weight. It's a motivation based on guilt. Now that guilt could come from outside. You could be guilted into feeling like you lose weight because you'll feel bad about yourself if you don't. Now some of that comes from inside, but your motivation is driven by feeling guilt, feeling anxiety if you don't. The third form is what we call identified motivation. And that, you answer that question because I'm losing weight because it feels important to me. I put value, not someone else, I put value on losing weight. I put value on improving my health. I put value on reducing my likelihood of having chronic illnesses. So it comes from inside. We're shifting more towards that internal locus of control. That area that you say, yeah, I don't have to just respond to what happens to me. I can initiate things and be good at initiating things. And it comes from the inside. Then the final is what we call intrinsic motivation. And this is probably one of the hardest for a lot of folks. Because you answer the question, I'm losing weight because it's fun. That's tough. Because most of us don't come from that initial point. That's not where we're starting from. But you lose weight because it feels good. You actually enjoy doing what you're doing. You see how that's a little different? It's more than, it's different from just placing value on it. You really like it. You're enjoying it. You get up in the morning and say, I'm looking forward to doing the things I'm doing because it feels good. And again, that's much more over on that internal. Well, it probably doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out the two motivations that were most associated with keeping the weight off were the two last motivations that were more geared towards the internal side. People who placed value on what they were doing for themselves, and people who just liked what they were doing. People who were having fun. Those were folks who were able to maintain their program. It didn't matter, and here's what's cool. It really didn't matter what kind of program they were doing. Because here's the dirty little secret with all this stuff. Most of it works. It's just you got to stick to it. You got to be persistent. You got to like it. You've got to see it as a lifestyle. You've got to see it as something that has value to you. Yeah, it's a nice side effect if your spouse is really excited about the changes. It's great if your doc does a jig when you come in and your cholesterol is 50 points lower. But if it doesn't have value to you, if it's something you don't enjoy, you're starting behind the 8 ball. So your challenge is to really examine your motivation. Take a minute tonight or tomorrow. Think about what's driving you. What has brought you to this point? Because you're all winners. You've all done incredibly well. But you've got to really sit down now and think about, why did I do this? And then once you see why you did it, put yourself into one of those categories. See where you fit. And if you're not in one of those categories that says, well, it's really fun, or I really, really value what I'm doing, sit back. Think for a moment. I'm going to see if I can work this thing. Look at that. We've all been there, right? So the secret to maintenance in many instances is motivation, the proper type of motivation, and that's not that takes work, folks. I'm not making light of, it's just like someone for years as a doctor, people would come in my office and they'd ask me about losing weight, and I would say, well, just eat less and exercise more. You can do that. And I realize now how patronizing that was and how really detrimental that was. Because this stuff is hard, but what that's meaningful isn't. And think about the satisfaction that you're sitting there right now, knowing what you've already accomplished. It's like if you buy your kids a car, they're going to treat it very differently than if they bought it. So you got skin in the game now. You bought it. You earned it. And it wasn't easy. All right. Tips. That's the philosophy for the evening, class. Now we're going to get into some of the practical stuff that really can be appropriate. But I don't want to downplay how important that understanding is. It's the single thing you can do to maintain what you've accomplished. All right, here's some practical things. First of all, you've got to understand, and we touched on this the very first meeting, that true wellness is a balance of mind, body, and spirit. It's not just about weight loss. It's not just about looking better in a bathing suit. It's not just about losing the weight. It's about getting healthy. And true wellness is what I call the healing triad: mind, body, and spirit. You can be one of these top athletes setting world records in your sport, and you can be an emotional basket case. You can be the head of a mega church, a spiritual giant, but you can be so overweight that you're not able to accomplish half of what God has intended you to do. You can be a brilliant scientist, but be so blinded, so unable to accept faith in your life that you're not able to accomplish the things and achieve an understanding of meaning. So it's a three-legged stool: mind, body, and spirit. To be truly healthy and well, you have to balance those out. You cut any one of those legs off, and the stool falls down. I tell you, where I learned this myself was really with the birth of my first child. Susan and I had been married for a few years, and I'd been in practice for several years, and I'd delivered hundreds of babies. But this was the first time I was the daddy and not the doctor. I'm telling you, what a difference that makes. I mean, I learned in one night the difference between the mechanics of birth and the miracle of birth. I mean, it changed my perspective. It changed everything I did in the office. Some crazy things happen in a GYN office. I mean, I feel safe that I can tell these stories with y'all tonight. This is not going to be on the internet. Well, it is going to be on the internet, isn't it? Well, doggone it, I'm going to tell this anyway. I can say this because this didn't actually happen in my practice, so I don't have to feel like I'm breaking doctor-patient confidentiality. There was a nurse who had an older mother. She was in about her 60s, and she hated to come to the doctor, the GYN. Imagine that. Can't figure that for the life of me. But she told her nurse daughter that she hadn't gone for about 5 years, and her daughter was just flabbergasted. She couldn't believe she hadn't gone and had a checkup. She said, well, I'm petrified of it. I hate it. I don't like to do it. And her daughter said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Come over to my house. We'll have a nice dinner or a relaxing evening. We'll get up in the morning. We'll get joint appointments. We'll go in. You'll get seen. I'll get seen. Everything will be fine. But you need to get checked. She said, all right, I'll do it. So they had a nice dinner. They relaxed. They got up the next morning, got all ready, and went to the GYN office. And most of you, I was going to say all of y'all have been here. I'm used to speaking to women, but there's a lot of you folks who probably haven't been there. So this is what happens. You go into the GYN office, and you're there on time, and about 4 hours later, you get called back to the exam room, right? Yeah, exactly. And you get in there, and this place is as cold, you can hang meat in this room. And they tell you to put on napkins. I'm not kidding, am I? So you're sitting on this thing, your behind's already frozen to the table, you're wearing these napkins, you're turning blue. I mean, you look like a Smurf in a toga by the time the doctor comes in there, which is about another 2 hours after that. So he tells you to lay back and to scoot down and to scoot down some more and scoot down some more. Well, that's what this lady, he was going to see the mother first, so she's in there and she's getting ready, and she's already anxious, so she's scooting down, and the doctor's getting ready to do the pap smear, and he stops, and he says, wow, you took a little extra time getting ready this morning, didn't you? And she was just like, what? You know, she was already anxious, but this just totally freaked her out. So they did the exam, gets off the table, gets dressed, goes back out to the room, and the daughter can see in her eyes, something's wrong. And she says, Mom, what happened? What's wrong? And so she explained what the doctor said, and she said, well, Mom, what did you do this morning? She said, well, I got up, I took a shower, I used the feminine deodorant, I came with you to... And she goes, Mom, I don't have any feminine deodorant? She says, yes, it's that gold bottle sitting right there next to your lavatory. She said, Mom, that's my gold glitter hairspray. You got to have a sense of humor. What that has to do with weight loss, I have no clue. But it's one of my favorite stories. Thank you for indulging me. Don't keep food. How do you follow that? Where do you go from there, you know? Don't keep food. Don't keep food in the house that's bad for you. Now that sounds so simplistic, but it's so true. If it ain't there, you can't get it. Out of sight, out of mind, out of reach. So a real simple tool is just be careful how you shop. 80% of women are responsible for bringing the food into the house. And for the other 20% of folks, they wish they were. My kids hate our house when they come home from. We got 2 kids in college now, and they'll come home from college. It'll be 20 minutes they're in the house, and the first thing, and Susan can say, can confirm this. The first thing they'll say is, "You don't have anything good to eat here." You know, thank goodness they're girls. You know, guys are even worse. Men and women are different. Let me tell you, men and women are. It's like when Susan goes in the closet and she's rummaging around for 5 minutes and comes out and says, "I don't have anything to wear." What she really means is she doesn't have anything new to wear. When I'm in that same closet and I come out and I say, "I don't have anything to wear," what I really mean is I don't have anything clean to wear. So men and women are different. But our daughters come in and they hate coming home. They actually start shopping before they come home and bring the stuff with them. So if it's not around, it makes it much harder to kind of cheat a little bit. So every little bitty thing you can do to help you along this journey is beneficial. So if it's not healthy, keep it out of the house. If it's in the house, eat something good before you eat something bad. Drink a glass of water before you have that cookie. Eat an apple before you have that dessert. Chances are either you'll eat less of it or maybe you won't eat it at all. And what goes with that also is have healthy snacks around the house. And hopefully by now you've learned what those are. If you haven't, I've got a great book back there that can tell you that you're welcome to look at afterwards. But make those available. Make your life as simple as possible. Don't make it hard on yourself. And I know these things sound simple, but you'd be amazed at what one little change can do. And once you make those changes, they become habits. Once they become habits, they determine your actions. And once those actions become your character, and that leads to your legacy. But it all starts with that thought that becomes that action. So these simple things, it's not a linear increase, it's a logarithmic increase. One little change today, 6 months from now, is not going to be over here, it's going to be up here. Put more green things on your plate. Make your plate a rainbow. The more colors you can have, generally the healthier you are. Now that doesn't apply if you're, I've got some green jelly beans, or, this was just St. Patrick's Day and I got green beer. Sprinkles, I like that. So you've got to be smart about it, but the more colors you can get generally, the better off you're going to be when it comes to vegetable variety. A couple of quick things. I mentioned this last time, but it's worth repeating. Covert Bailey is one of my favorite authors. Many of you who are my age and older remember years ago on PBS they did a series called Fit or Fat, and he wrote several books by that name. And his simple rules for eating were 4 simple rules, and they really apply. One, eat balanced. There's no magic food. There's no magic. There's no one horrible food, and there's no one superfood. The good Lord made an amazing cornucopia in an abundance for a reason, because we can get wonderful nutrients from a tremendous variety. So I'm not one of these that says you ought to be a vegetarian, or you ought to be paleo, or you ought to be McDonald's, or you ought to be celery, or you ought to be kudzu, whatever. You eat just a balanced variety of food. Low fat, in particular, low saturated fat. Now, we could spend a whole day talking about the pros and cons of low fat, low sugar, but generally, lower saturated fat is a good deal. 80% of the brain is fat. So if you are no fat, then you're just going to end up being a politician. So low sugar. Sugar is really the culprit in this day and age. When I look at the studies over the last 10 years, if I had to pick one thing that's destroying the health of this world, it's sugar. And that means, a fancy word for sugar is carbohydrate. Because basically every carbohydrate that you put in your body is broken down into glucose, which is the original form of sugar. Now, the table sugar we think is a mixture of two different kinds of sugars. But when I'm talking about sugar, I'm talking about glucose. And that's what every sugar that we eat gets converted into in the body. Balanced, low fat, low sugar. And here's one you probably didn't expect: high fiber. We don't get enough fiber in our diets. Normally, if we eat more vegetables, we will, but we're not getting enough fiber. Fiber has an amazing ability to do a whole bunch of things. We could spend an entire night just talking about that. Michael Pollan just wrote a book a few years back where he talks about his guide to eating. And again, it's simple. Eat real food as close to the ground as you can imagine it. I mean, that doesn't mean sitting on the ground eating the food, but as close to its natural state. Mostly plants. That's his interpretation. I can buy that. He said mostly. And just less of it. Very simple. And remember, people who lost weight, there was no one best plan. People who maintained their loss, there's no one best plan. It's going to be what works for you, and that's going to take some experimentation. Keep a food diary. Boy, does that make some people mad. Keep a food diary. It creates awareness. It's shocking. In the weight management program we run in our office, that's one of the things we do in the first 3 weeks, and it shocks people when they realize exactly what they are eating, when they're eating it, and how much they're eating. And that's a tremendous awareness. And it helps them to be aware, to be mindful of what they're consuming. And you can only do that if you record it, if you write it down. Turn your body into a better butter burner. What are we? Fat. What do we want? To start our diet and exercise. What do we want to start? On Monday. Today's Monday. Next Monday. There is only one way to get rid of fat in the body, and it's the fat in the body that's causing the problems. There's only one way. It's not wrapping yourself in cellophane. It's not watching an infomercial and thinking you can buy a pill and then sit on the couch and it's going to be burning fat. And you wonder, who in their right mind would do that? Well, they're running a multi-million-dollar infomercial for a reason. They're making a killing. There's a lot of folks out there buying that garbage. There's only one way to get rid of fat. There's only one possible way to physiologically get it out of your system. That's to burn it in the muscles. And unless you get it sucked out or cut out. But that's another talk. But if you want to get rid of it without a scalpel, you've got to burn it in the muscles. Last time, I don't have time to do that tonight, but last time, just for those who were here last time, remember the walk, W-A-L-K. Wind sprints, that means just if you're walking, and that's your exercise, just for 30 seconds during your walk, every 5 minutes, increase your pace. That's what we call the wind sprints. Aerobic. You got to do aerobic exercise to get into the fat burning zone. Weight lift. You got to have the muscles. The muscles are where the fat's burned. That's your furnace. You just need to stoke it. And then the K stands for CrossFit. I can't spell. I'm going with K. That's not CrossFit, cross-train. That means do things. If you're always a walker, mix it up. Do some weights. Do a bike. Do water aerobics. If you're always a runner, do weights. Do something different. Mix it up. Not only is that more fun, but it fools your body into adapting and getting back. Many people who hit plateaus, if you're one of those folks who are doing everything you've been doing and you lost weight and then you hit a plateau, the best way to break through that plateau is change your exercise regimen. Do something either longer, more intense, or different. And that's the quickest way to break through that plateau. Plan ahead. It's the people who plan ahead. Oh yeah, that reminds me, don't ever do this. Don't ever use food as a reward. And I want to speak especially to you parents, because I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Is what is the first thing you do when the kid does something well? Let's go get an ice cream, or let's go celebrate, or let's take you out. There is a psychological attachment to unhealthy food as a reward, and that follows us the rest of our lives. That's a way of celebrating. And some of it has to do with the sugar addiction. And again, we could spend a whole day talking about what happens in the brain and how sugar is one of the most addicting chemicals in the universe. But don't set rewards as unhealthy food for yourself or your kids. Plan ahead. People who are successful, I talked to a lady in the office today, and she said the biggest problem she has with maintaining her weight is she doesn't plan ahead. She doesn't plan for those known obstacles that are going to come up. She knows this week at work is going to be crazy. So instead of just running down to the vending machine when she has a minute, she needs to spend Saturday and Sunday a little bit, maybe an hour each day, preparing something that she can put in the refrigerator and take with her during that day. So she's not hopping out and getting the milkshake or getting the candy corn in the vending machine. Plan ahead. Accommodate. Think ahead of the things that we all know are coming. Life happens. The only way for this to become permanent is for it to accommodate life. And that means stresses, and that means changes in jobs, and that means kids, and that means husbands and wives. But if you think ahead, if you plan ahead, you're much more likely to stay focused and on track. Very quickly, because I know we're getting short on time here. Very quickly, you each got a handout. That's one of my favorite things to do. Susan and I are doing an experiment with one of these food services where you order the food and they deliver it for meals and you cook it and you do it. And it's really been kind of cool because it's just the two of us now, and they're really healthy, and it's been fun to do that. And I know my kids are in college and still on a college budget, so I get a kick out of taking these really pretty meals and taking a picture and texting it to them, knowing they're boiling their ramen noodles, And I'm saying, look at what we're eating tonight. I love doing that. They hate me. All right, very quickly, you each got a handout tonight. If you didn't, there's some to pick up over here that are some of my favorite apps. Welcome to the 21st century for the Couch to 5K. And why are we even talking about that? Because exercise is mandatory when it comes to maintenance. If you think you're going to be successful at keeping your weight in a healthy range without doing some type of exercise, you're wrong. It ain't going to happen. I can promise you that. Now, that exercise doesn't mean running a marathon. I'm talking about going out and walking around the block. You've got to move. We're designed to move. Every part of our body was geared to move. So you've got to be, and virtually, I don't know anybody, there are a few exceptions. There are some people with medical conditions that make it very difficult. But almost everybody certainly out here, is able to do something exercise-wise. What I've found is the people who have smartphones, these little apps, or you can get them on the computer too. It doesn't have to be on a smartphone, but the apps are very helpful in two ways with regards to a program like a Couch to 5K, which basically means I'm going to take somebody who's never exercised ever and get them to finish a 3.1 mile race, which is what a 5K is. I think it's 3.1. It's somewhere around 3. And these apps provide two things. One, they provide a very doable plan. Most of these are 9 to 12 week plans that don't require any more than 30 minutes a day, sometimes 30 minutes 3 times a week. We all can find that time. But it gives you a plan, and two, it gives you a means to be accountable. Many of them have social networks where you can communicate and you can support each other. There's bulletin boards. There's a lot of ways of interacting, and it's that social interaction for some people that provides motivation to be successful with that. If you're going to start any kind of exercise program, number one, you got to know why. We go always goes back to why. Don't compare yourself to anybody. That's one thing that keeps people away from exercising sometimes, is they compare themselves to other folks and they feel inadequate, that they can't do something. Man, all you have to do is go on YouTube, or you'll see. I was looking at a video today of a guy who was 480 pounds and is now 180, and it showed his evolution over those months to years, and it was incredibly motivating. Keep it fun if you can. Clear it with your doc. It goes without saying. Start slow. Don't go out and try to run 5 miles tomorrow if you haven't been running. That's the worst thing that happens to people, is they try to do too much too soon. They get hurt, or they get injured, or they get frustrated, and they quit. There's nothing wrong with walking slow and then picking up the pace. Gradual slow wins this race. This is a turtle. This isn't a hare. This is not a sprint. It's a marathon. Let me close real quickly. And then if we have time for questions, I don't know what our time limit is, but let me close just real quickly with something that I hope illustrates really the major point I want to get across tonight. I read an article in the New York Times about 6 months ago where a reporter did an interview with a set of brothers. They were both in their 60s at this time. And they were raised in the same home. One was a priest in the diocese there, had risen up and was one of the most well-respected religious leaders in the city. The other was an alcoholic, homeless man living in the Bowery. And this reporter found both of them and separately interviewed them, asking about their past, asking about their life. And the one thing that struck me in this whole interview, he asked both the men why they thought they were where they were today. And the men gave exactly the same answer. The priest said, "My dad was an alcoholic. What do you expect?" The homeless man said, "My dad was an alcoholic. What do you expect?" One man's excuse was another man's opportunity. You have a choice. You have a choice. God has put a seed in every one of your hearts. And if you'll water that seed with the Word, nourish it with fellowship, and fertilize it with faith, it's going to grow into the most beautiful, healthy, fit, happy person, unique, that you were created to be. Thank you very much for being with me tonight.